Welcome to Synergy Schminergies, the business podcast for people who hate business podcasts. I'm your co-host, Jeremy.
And I'm your co-host, Rose. And today we're talking with Austin Belcak, the founder of Cultivated Culture and one of the most engaging voices in the career space.
I'm so excited, Rose, because I feel like Austin's got all this juicy intel on all the hottest areas, from AI and hiring to ghost jobs, all these big questions that we want answers to. What are some of the things that you're most excited to ask Austin about?
So, as you know, Jeremy, before I started working with you, I was unemployed for a little bit. I actually got to the point where I kind of gave up a little bit, not in, a complete giving up way, but it was very clear that there were a lot of ghost jobs, as you know, and a lot of people were really struggling to find work. And there talks about the white collar recession and AI taking jobs and hiring freezes. So it was just a lot of anxiety in the air, and there's still a lot of anxiety in the air. So I really am curious about how his take on hiring, how AI has shaped all of that. Is there really a white collar recession, or is something else happening? And why does it suck so much to be a job seeker right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it does feel like there's so much pain out there, so much stress. And so what I'm really curious about is not just how bad is it, but how can job seekers cope? What are some really sort of tactical strategies that people can use, not just to get through this gauntlet, but to get through it in style? So I can't wait to dive into all of that. And without further ado, please welcome Austin. Welcome, Austin. Austin, we're so excited to have you here because, as I mentioned in the intro, I just look at you as a total guru in the career space. There's all this craziness swirling around here in 2025, and you're one of the few people out there who's really making sense of it for all those job seekers who are listening right now. Now, that being said, before we get into all the good stuff, tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get into the space in the first place?
Yeah, well, thank you for the generous introduction, Jeremy. I appreciate it. And the feeling is certainly mutual. So very excited to be here. But I ended up in this space as a frustrated job seeker. Back when I started my career, I did all the things that we were supposed to do, right? I was looking for a job. So I went to my friends and my family and career services and and Google, of course, LinkedIn, all the places that we go to for advice. And I implemented the advice that was given, tweak your resume, tweak your cover letter, apply for jobs, rinse and repeat. And I did that for about a month, applied to 100 places, didn't get any results. Did that for another month and applied to 200 places, didn't get any results. And started to believe that maybe the system was set up in a way that wasn't really working for me, wasn't really going to allow me to get to where I wanted to go. And so I decided to look into a different approach to the job search. And really where that started was seeking out people who already had what I wanted. So I sat down and I made a list of criteria for the job that I was looking for, working in New York City, making a certain salary, working at a certain type of company, at Microsoft, at Google, et cetera, being under a certain age because, I didn't want to wait 10 years for this stuff to come to fruition. And I used LinkedIn to find those people, and I reached out to them. I connected with them. I learned from their experiences, their stories, their mistakes. And I took all that information and I just began testing. I just put it into practice. I began tracking, the inputs and the outputs. And as I got that data, I used it to refine my process and essentially built out a system that gave me much more control over the process and allowed me to get in the door with Uber, with Microsoft, with then Twitter, and with Google as well. And so I took those processes to their respective ends, ended up with a Microsoft offer that basically changed my life. And once I started there, I had a lot of folks reaching out to me, asking me how I had done it. So that was the genesis of my business. I started it while I was working full-time at Microsoft. I basically taught people that system that I had built myself. And then as we got more clients, we were able to kind of understand, how do we adapt that system for other people? How do we adapt it for changing markets? And I think that's really apt for today's conversation because the job market changes all the time. But I think that the change that we've seen over the last couple of years, and especially over the last 6 to 12 months, has sort of been unlike most other markets of the last 10 years. And that leads to a lot of frustration. That leads to a lot of anxiety and a lot of demoralization. People feeling like it's not possible to get a job that's exciting. People feeling like it's not possible to maybe change careers or do something that aligns with their goals, and sort of feeling forced into accepting whatever comes your way. So on our side, our coaching program now, we keep a lot of data on our clients, and our average outcomes are a $44,000 raise in an offer in about 15 and a half weeks. And that is in this market today. So the stuff that we talk about, the stuff that we share, all that's going to be tied to what we see in the market with our clients. And it's also, the result of a system that's been built and iterated on for the last 9 years or so.
Wonderful. So speaking of anxiety, because I was also just talking to Jeremy about how I was, very previously a job seeker, and anxiety is definitely how I felt every single day. And I know a lot of people who have been job searching for years, and it is very demoralizing. So to start off our conversation about just modern hiring and like the changes, what is the landscape right now that we're seeing in 2025? Like, how do you think that it's different now that compared to 10 years ago or even 5 years ago?
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference, especially in recent memory, is the shift from it being more of an employee-centric market or a candidate-centric market to an employer-centric market. You look a couple of years ago, and candidates really had the upper hand. There, was a lot of demand, there was a lot of hiring, and candidates could really pick and choose. We would see people with multiple offers, and they were getting those offers very, very quickly, and they were turning down some offers. And now that has completely shifted on its head. It is really an employer-centric market right now. And what that means is employers are getting a lot of demand. They're getting a lot of qualified candidates, and they feel like they are able to sort of impose their will, so to speak, on the hiring process. So what that means in more tangible terms is longer hiring processes. So more rounds. We're seeing interview processes go multiple rounds longer than they used to. We're seeing companies really kind of want the perfect candidate, and they're finding reasons to not hire people who don't meet most of the criteria that they have. We're finding that, the ability to get in the door is just a lot more difficult. It requires more applications, more effort to win some of those interviews. And so all of these things combined makes it feel like the job search is much more difficult. And I think one added layer to that is, outside of the employers themselves, there's also the element of more people in the market. So we've been seeing a lot of layoffs, especially in tech, but now, more recently with the federal government, in the public sector, et cetera. All these people are, pretty well qualified, and now they're entering the job search. They're your competition. And so not only is it more difficult to get an employer to see your value, but there are also more people, more talent out there that you're competing with, for that smaller success rate. And so all of those things combined leads to a job market where it's tougher to land jobs. And I think most importantly, the actionable piece is what used to work a couple of years ago doesn't work now. And that's one of the biggest things we see. I run a weekly session with our community. Anybody who wants to join can join. It's totally free. And the number one thing that we see people bringing up there around this topic is the fact that the strategies that they used to use a couple of years ago that got them their last job, they're just not getting any traction with those strategies now. And I saw another survey that came out, I think it was like towards the end of last year, but the data was that 70% of job seekers felt that this search was more difficult than their last. So anecdotal data, survey data is all supporting the fact that this market is significantly more difficult than previous markets. But again, that is usually the case of job searching in a certain way. We often see the people who come to us have similar traits with their search, and those traits, those strategies, that approach is leading to this lack of results and frustration. And if we shift that a little bit, if we take a bit of a different approach that is more optimized for the current market that we're in, we can still get the results that we're looking for. And so when we talk about a more difficult market, it doesn't mean that, oh, well, it's just really difficult and you're never going to get what you want, so just resign to that fact. And instead, what it means is this is difficult because what used to work doesn't work anymore. And so you need to adapt with the market if you want to be successful. And if you are willing to make those adaptations, you can still get the results that you're looking for on the other side.
Wow, thanks for that great overview. As depressing as it is, it's important to face reality. Tell us more about some of the things that might have worked during the Great Resignation that are no longer working today, and then also some things that people should be doing instead to kind of take that reality into consideration.
Yeah, so I think a lot of stuff worked during the Great Resignation, right? You insert your approach here, and it likely got better outcomes than you're seeing now. So online applications, we saw a surprising amount of clients and got a surprising amount of anecdotal data around online applications seeing a bump. You could apply to jobs, you would actually get callbacks, and that would result in interviews and offers. That's no longer really the case anymore, or at least to a degree where it feels like a sustainable practice, both, from an outcomes perspective and a mental health perspective. In addition to that, networking was kind of the same thing. You could reach out to a hiring manager, a potential contact, and most of those people would be excited to chat, willing to chat because they had roles to fill, because they wanted to get somebody in the door. You were looking at scenarios where there were, if there weren't multiple offers, the proposition or potential for there to be multiple offers was there for employers. And so they felt that they had to do more to win candidates. So it was easier to negotiate. It was easier to get higher compensation packages. You didn't necessarily have to settle for roles that didn't feel like they were fully aligned. And frankly, you didn't have to put in as much effort to get the output that you were looking for back then. And so now the opposite is true. You really need a much more structured approach that is tailored for this market. And so, on our side, really where we see people, in those weekly calls that I mentioned, we talk about 3 specific stages of the job search where we see people, they're sort of inflection points. And if people do them incorrectly or skip them, then there's a lot of frustration. There's a lot more time added to the search. Whereas if people do them the correct way and have adapted to the market, we tend to see better outcomes. And so the first stage there is clarity. Most job seekers are going to skip clarity altogether. Either they're in such a rush to get a new job that they're just updating the resume and blasting it out. Maybe there's some financial pressure. Maybe they just don't want to be job searching for because it's exhausting and demoralizing and they want to get out of it. Whatever that is, we don't take the time to really get clear on what a good fit is for us, and we just get out there in the market. The other bucket of people that we tend to see are folks that are kind of stuck in some analysis paralysis. So they are wondering which path is right for them. They have multiple paths that they're considering. They kind of walk down one path and then they worry it's not the right one for them. So they walk it back and they go down another path and they kind of rinse and repeat. And in both of those cases, the issue that we're running into is if we're not clear on where we want to go, we try to be everything to everyone. And that usually ends up in us being nothing to none of the companies that are out there. And if we have the analysis paralysis issue, we're just not committing 100% to any given path. Even if we're considering 2-3 paths, the most that we can give to any one of those paths is 50% or 33% respectively. And that's just not going to be enough to beat out people who have invested 100% in that path. So we need to really work to get clarity, and I can share more insights on how to do that if we want. But the second stage is the way that people job search, the medium. And again, most people are still using online applications, but those success rates are incredibly low. Like we're talking on average 2%, sometimes fewer, depending on the company. Usually as you go up in caliber, something like a Google, they were getting 50,000 resumes a week several years ago. I imagine that number has only gone up. And so that percentage success rate is going to be even lower. So you're just playing a game where there are very low odds of winning. On the other hand, networking and referrals are where we see a lot of hiring happen. That's where most of our clients are getting hired. And so we have our clients build a system around generating those referrals. And so if you're spending most of your time showing up on LinkedIn, showing up on Indeed, looking for new jobs, applying to them, even if you're personalizing your resume, even if you're writing a personalized cover letter, even if you're doing all that, you're still playing a game where there's a very low chance of success. And so that's going to be frustrating. Whereas if we focus on networking, the odds of getting in the door, they massively increase. And there's a lot that we can do in the networking phase that's going to increase our overall conversion rate in terms of winning the offer. And then the third thing that we see is people summarizing instead of selling. Most people are going to show up, and this is across the job search: resumes, cover letters, networking conversations, interviews. I think the place where it most commonly shows up and hinders people is in interviews. But showing up to a conversation and simply just summarizing what you've done instead of actively selling your experience into what that company needs. And so, for example, Jeremy, if you asked me to tell you about a time that I overcame a challenge, most people are just going to say, well, in my last job, here was a challenge that we ran into. Here are the things that I did to solve for it. And here was this outcome that we got. And that's nice, but now we're kind of crossing our fingers and hoping that that was what you wanted to hear. Whereas what we have our clients do is they go deep on researching the company. They leverage their networking conversations to learn more about goals, challenges, and initiatives. And then they weave that into an answer that, if you ask me the same question, would be a little bit more like, well, in preparation for this conversation, I actually spoke to 3 people on your team. And then I watched the CEO's keynote that they gave at this recent conference. And, I did this other research over here. Through all that, my understanding is your biggest challenge is X. That's the reason that you're hiring for this role. So let me give an example of a time that I helped a previous company overcome that same challenge. But then also, if you're open to it, I've been brainstorming some ideas for how I think I could help you all solve for that specific challenge if you hired me. And I'd love to share those with you. That answer is very different than what most people are giving. And so these types of things are what we see candidates needing to shift. They really need to move into a value-first approach, a highly personalized approach. And if they do that, they're getting the outcomes that we're looking for. But if they are not doing those things and they're leaning on, the stuff that worked a couple of years ago, more traditional aspects of things, those are the people who we hear about stuck in the job search for 8 months, 12 months and beyond, feeling like they have to accept a role that's not a good fit. And so there are a lot of differences. Those are just a couple, but I'll pause there because, we could go down the rabbit hole and I could talk about that all day.
Let's say there's a candidate who has very clarity over the role. They know exactly what they want. They know what companies they want. And then they also are networking, like you said, but they never get to that third stage where they're even able to interview. What other challenges outside people not doing the right things are people facing, right? So is that, there was an article about ghost jobs, for example, and how I think 20% of jobs that are posted aren't real. And then there's also AI, right? I think in the old days, it was more rare for people to network, but now people are starting to catch on that you should be networking. So people are kind of spamming recruiters with LinkedIn messages, right? So what do you think is the point where it won't, none of this will work? If that's, I can rephrase this whole question, guys.
I think I understand what you're getting at, but I would say that if you're doing things the right way, it's always going to work. And so what I mean by that is, and really the answer to your question is the networking focus. Ghost jobs are easily weeded out when we go network with people. You talk to somebody and they tell you, we're hiring for that role. Yes. Or, I don't know why that's still posted, but yeah, we filled that role, whatever, last month. And so talking to people face to face is or even virtually is a really easy way to weed out, those ghost jobs versus what's actually active. Now, we have to do the outreach and that's going to take some time and effort, but this whole process is going to take time and effort, especially if we want to do it well. So I think, I'll just preface all the strategies we talk about are likely going to take time and effort, but most things that are worth doing do take time and effort. So yes, you may have to reach out to some people and get that insight from them before you realize it's a ghost job. But better to do that than to spend a month applying to 200 ghost jobs and not even having a chance, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing with networking is that AI can help you with some of it, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to get on a call with somebody. You're going to have to meet somebody. You're going to have a conversation with them. And I actually think that the people, and I am a huge advocate and proponent of, many aspects of AI. I am, my wife actually just asked me to stop talking about it yesterday because I've been talking about it so much. And she is wonderful, but I think she was very justified in that claim because we've been going down the rabbit hole with some really cool stuff and it's just has my brain buzzing. But I say that to say that AI is going to impact people in different ways. If you're somebody who thinks AI is going to do everything for you and you just offload your entire kind of brain to AI, you're going to miss out on some skills. You're going to be rusty. You're not going to be able to close that loop. But if you are somebody who is leveraging AI in the right ways, say to brainstorm ways to add value to people, to brainstorm, ways to illustrate that value and send them those messages. But then you're somebody who is still working on your networking skills, your conversation skills, talking to people face to face. That's the type of person who's going to be successful in this market and the market's going forward. Because sure, at the end of the day, maybe, all the applicants are using AI and all the hiring teams are using AI and all the online applications are AI, all the more reason to be on the networking side. And then once you're on the networking side, I actually think that if you invest in those interpersonal skills, you are going to stand out, because a lot of other people are hoping that AI is still going to do most of it for them. And a lot of people are thinking networking is scary, or networking is something that people are just either good at or they're not. They're born with it. And none of those things are really true. We can be better at networking. We can improve that skill set. And so I actually think that as the world becomes, more technocentric, the people who know how to use that technology in the right ways, but also are still working on improving, the human element for themselves, those are going to be the people who win. So at the end of the day, what this really means is that networking is the most important part of career development. And I actually think that historically it's been the best way to get jobs, and it's been one of the largest career accelerators. I actually think that's only going to be amplified as we move forward and as technology gets more and more integrated.
Oh, I love that, Austin. I feel like one of the things that's always driven markets throughout time is scarcity. Mm-hmm. And the scarcer relational skills become in an age of AI and technology, the more valuable they're going to be as well. So really invest in those. Now, just to make it really concrete, imagine someone is listening to this. Maybe they're Gen Z, they're an international student from a culture that has a different sort of expectation around networking. If they say to you, Austin, I understand theoretically why networking is so important, but I'm not sure how to pull it off. I'm not sure how to actually do that as this shy, introverted person who's new to this culture. How would you guide them on this journey? What kind of advice would you give them to take those first couple steps?
Yeah. So basically the first thing that we want to do with networking is we want to go for quality over quantity. So you want to go out there and you want to find people who can influence your ability to get the result that you want. We're not just going to meetups and shaking whoever's hands there and getting their LinkedIn profile. We're not just emailing random people at the company just because they were a second connection instead of a third connection. We really want to start, because we have a blank canvas, we want to start with the people who can have the largest impact on the goals that we have, be it getting a job or anything else that you want to network towards. So that's the first piece. The second piece is we want to add value to this person, and we want to build a relationship in layers. I always say that networking is like a bank account, like a checking account. If we try to withdraw, $20 from our checking account, but there have been zero deposits made into the account, we're going to overdraft, right? And overdrafts come with consequences. Maybe that's a corny example, but that's how I like to think about it. And so what we need to do is we need to make those deposits in the form of adding value, warming up the relationship before we can withdraw. And so then the question becomes, well, what kind of value can we add here? And there are a lot of different ways to do this. If you want to build the skill yourself, one of my favorite ways to do this is what we call the 10 idea strategy. And basically what this means is you go get a contact, or better if you get 3 to 5 contacts, grab a piece of paper and sit down and write out 10 ways that you could add value to this person. What's going to end up happening is you're going to come up with 3 to 4 really easy ways to add value to them. Send them an article, share this resource, introduce them to somebody. That's what everybody else is doing, because those are the easy things to think about. But then you're going to get stuck at like idea number 5, and ideas 5 through 8 are going to be kind of difficult to come up with. And then once you get to idea 8, you're really going to feel stretched, because now you've exhausted like the creative elements, and now you kind of have to think a little bit more outside the box. And ideas 9 and 10 usually end up being some of the best ideas, because you have gotten rid of the stuff that everybody else is doing. Then you've removed even one layer beyond that. And now you've really forced yourself to get creative and to get interesting with the way that you're approaching these people. And so if you do that for 3 to 5 contacts, you're likely going to have enough strategies that are going to last you for the entirety of the job search. So it's not as if you have to do this with every contact, but this is really more of like a muscle building exercise, with the muscle being your ability to identify angles for adding value to people. If you don't want to do that, or if you feel confident in your abilities to do that and you want to delegate a bit of it, AI can help. So something that we can do is take a screenshot of somebody's LinkedIn profile and maybe run some Google searches on them and screenshot or pull, text or links from features, posts that they wrote, things of that nature. We can upload it all to AI and say, hey, here's this person that I want to network with. I don't want to just ask them for a referral. Instead, give me 20 different ways that I could add value to this person in ways that they, would be excited to receive or would be interested in replying to. And then see what it spits out, and then drill down on those things. And this is where some of those, hesitations or concerns that you mentioned, Jeremy, come up. So there's going to be a bunch of examples, and then we're going to think in our heads, I'm an international student. I'm not able to, let's say I'm scared of meeting somebody for coffee. Like, how could I do that coffee chat? So then you type in, you say, well, hey, I like the idea of a coffee chat, but English isn't my first language, and I feel intimidated going to a coffee chat. What can I do? Or maybe you are a little bit more junior. Maybe you're still a student and you think, well, I'd love to add value to somebody, but what could I possibly add to somebody who's been in the industry for 10 years when I'm a student? So you ask ChatGPT, hey, I want to add value, but I'm a student and they have 10 years of experience. What could I possibly add? When you do that and you do it multiple times, you're going to get answers. And those answers are basically going to refine and tailor and tweak the strategies that were recommended so they feel more comfortable for you. And I think what you're going to find is you're eventually going to get to a place where there's something that you do feel like you can act on. Once you have those, then what we want to do is try to build a relationship up in a few small layers rather than one big leap. So rather than reaching out and asking for a 30-minute coffee chat or worse, a referral right away, maybe we reach out and we ask for advice. Hey, Jeremy, I know that you have built, this really amazing business. And I personally am looking to hone my skills in this specific area that I think you have expertise in. Would you recommend that I listen to this podcast episode over here? Or would you recommend that I take this course online? Even if you're open to just replying with A or B, that would be great. Something along those lines. We get the reply from you and you say, hey, Austin, thanks for reaching out. I do A. Well, now I can go do that thing and I can report my results back to you and I can ask you for more advice. And so now we're building the relationship in these smaller layers where we're warming things up and we're giving ourselves the space to add context and give them information and make them feel invested in us rather than going from zero to like, hey, can I get a referral at your company? So if we do those things and we leverage the strategies that we either came up with ourselves or AI came up with, that's how we want to be building relationships. And it doesn't have to take months. You can do these things in the matter of, 10 days, 2 weeks, things like that. Once you get proficient at them and once you start to see which strategies are working. So it's not something that you don't need 6 months to become this person's best friend and you're texting each other, every day. And that's not what's needed here. Instead, we just need to build up enough of a rapport to have an investment from this person and have some alignment with our skills to make this happen.
Wonderful. I've heard a lot of people say that, right now we're living in a time where entry-level positions are slowly getting, are disappearing because of AI. And a lot of Gen Z will tell you like, oh, I'm doing everything you're saying, I'm networking. But the issue is when it comes down to me for a position and someone who's way more experienced, has many more years, they're definitely going to choose the other person, even if they really like me, even if they're my mentor. What do you think any of these concerns are valid, and what advice would you give to these folks?
Yeah, so the concerns are valid, but there are, things that we can do. So yes, a lot of these more entry level, roles where the tasks are such that they can be automated are going to get automated out. And I think we're in one, I think this is a temporary period. I think the definition of an entry level role is going to change. And I think the curriculums in schools are going to change to adapt to that. And I think what we're going to start to see is, and I actually think it will be for the better if it's done correctly. Obviously, there are many ways that this could go the wrong way. But if it is such that a lot of the administrative kind of data entry, mindless work is outsourced to AI, now all of a sudden, we can start to train some people on more strategic thinking a little bit earlier. But that's going to take a long time to come to fruition. So for the people who are job searching now, the biggest advantage that you can give for yourself is to go create experience. And this has really always been true. Entry-level job seekers have always had this problem. I know it feels more, that it feels like a larger problem and a bigger challenge now, and that may be true. But generally speaking, we've been doing this for 10 years, and all 10 years, entry-level job seekers have come to us and said, well, this job wants 4 years of experience and I have 0. And it has always been a thing. What works is going and creating your own experience. Earlier on in your career, everybody is operating on the same qualifications. It's what was your GPA, it's what was your major, it's where were your internships. In some unfortunate cases, it's where did you go to college. And then if you have a year of experience or whatever it is, it's that as well. But when everybody's competing on those same things, it feels hard to differentiate yourself because you don't know what else you can do. But actually, if you take just a little bit of time to brainstorm on the ways that you can create your own experience and value. Once you do that, you're really going to set yourself apart. So something that we recommend to our clients who are either, early on in their career and looking to get that advantage, or people who are changing careers, is something that we call the 25 posts, the portfolio strategy. 25 posts is a different one. Portfolio strategy is basically where you choose some companies that you would want to work for, maybe 1 to 3 of your dream companies. And you go do a bunch of research on them as much as you can, right? Not just look at the company website, but go listen to their earnings calls, go listen to keynotes and interviews and podcasts with their executive leadership team. Go look at reviews of their products, go look at demos of their products, try to use the product yourself, like do all these things. And then try to identify opportunities, gaps, challenges, like try to identify ways that you could add value, and then go build out a solution to that. So I saw this great example of this. This person isn't affiliated with us at all, but the guy's name was Callum Birch. And one project that he put together was for this company called Kajabi. So Kajabi is kind of a content management platform for creators. It lets you house content and sell your products and do all this stuff. He basically did this process. He did a bunch of research, and what he found was an opportunity with the way that they offered their trial subscriptions and where there might be, a leaky bucket there. He went and found their website traffic. He made some hypotheses about their conversion rates down their funnel. And he said, look, I wanted to sign up for Kajabi, but the trial dissuaded me for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I'm probably not the only one feeling this. So let's assume that X% of your audience is feeling this. If that's the case, here's what you're missing out on, every month, every year. So how do we fix this? And then he went through the process of mapping out, how I would fix this problem. And part of that was an email sequence and repositioning. So he actually went through the process of building out the repositioning. He wrote the emails, and then he housed all this in a blog post, and he shared that blog post far and wide. And so I don't believe that he ended up with the job at Kajabi, but what he did end up with was a portfolio piece that now any company he goes and applies for, he can say, look what I put together for Kajabi. Like, want me to do that for you? I'd be happy to. Or, hey, I think this is what I'd be doing in the role. Here's an example of how I would do it. And so now when it's, okay, there's 5 people interviewing for this role, 4 of them have more experience than me, but they're all bullet points on a resume. I have 4 years of experience, like with Microsoft Word and with this and that. And then you show up and you're like, hey, look at this 10-page case study I put together on your competitor that I could just easily mirror for you. Well, now all of a sudden you've leapfrogged those people, because that is worth so much more. That's real, tangible value illustration compared to trying to figure out what all the jargon on these other people's resumes means. So that's a tried and true thing that anybody can do at almost any stage of their career, is work to just create the experience that they don't have. And again, AI is a great way to do this. You can plug it in and say, here are the skill gaps I have. What are 10 projects that I could put together to build these skills? Okay, now how could I do that for this challenge that I found at this company, or this opportunity I found at this other company? And just keep brainstorming until you find something that feels good. And then build it out and slap it on your LinkedIn profile, link it in your resume, create a personal website and put it on there. Just make it really easy to find, and then share your process even in LinkedIn content. Like, the more that you can build your brand around these assets, the more competitive that you're going to be, and the more that you're honestly going to create an advantage for yourself over everybody else who's simply relying on resumes and traditional LinkedIn profiles and the stuff that, everybody else is doing.
I love that, Austin. I feel like so often, whether it's Gen Z or millennials or Gen Xers before them, there was that sense of, oh, we're just such an unlucky generation to be born at this moment. And what you're saying is, hey, you can make your own luck. You can actually chart your own destiny just by taking advantage of this. And I have to brag on Rose a little bit here, because Rose did that exact thing when she was applying to come work with me.
Love it.
She actually went out, interviewed experts in the space, gathered all those insights together. I had no choice but to hire her because, like you said, Austin, she proved out she could do the job before she even had it. Mm-hmm. So it totally works. That being said, one last question from me.
Yeah.
You've got such a great position in this space, Austin, because you work with so many job seekers. You get to see all these trends in real time. If you were going to look into your crystal ball and imagine what hiring is going to be like in 2030, is it going to be the company's AI bot interviewing my custom GPT? Is it going to basically be all the same things as today with just a little bit of AI on the side? Where do you see things headed?
Yeah, so I think the trend is towards, on the online application side, I think we're going to see a lot of like AI meets AI kind of situation. Job seekers everywhere are using AI. Companies everywhere are also adopting AI. And so I think we're going to see a lot of AI focused resumes being put into AI driven hiring software. And I actually hope that that means resumes will be a less emphasized part of the process, and online applications will be a less emphasized part of the process. It's always been my hope that companies would take a few extra moments to try to understand, okay, how else could we gauge, fit here? And I think job seekers, by and large, kind of want their cake and want to eat it too. We see a lot of people kind of complaining that they shouldn't have to do all this extra work to get a job, or they shouldn't have to do all these things. But I think that if there was a change, even if it meant a little bit more work, if it meant that you could have a better opportunity to showcase your skills, personally, I would welcome that. I would be all for it. And so hopefully we'll see more of that. But to the end of, AI agents doing interviews and all this stuff, I think all that talk is kind of a waste of time and energy, just because no company is going to ever make a hiring decision just talking to an AI. Like, it's just not, they're going to require that you be there in person. And if they find out that you're using AI, like, you're going to be disqualified. And I think that is one of the most obvious conclusions of this, just because of how important hiring is. So, I think when we look at 2030, we're going to see a lot more AI on the online application side. I don't think there's going to be a solution in 5 years. I think companies are just going to move slowly on this. And I think it's going to be painful for job seekers who continue to believe that the traditional process is a good way to get hired. And I think it's going to be less painful for people who have the foresight to kind of do some of the things that we were talking about today, right? Lean more heavily on networking, make sure that they are doing things to develop their interpersonal skills so that when they show up in a networking conversation, they can be persuasive, they can build that relationship, they can sell their value and turn this person into an advocate. And I think we're just going to see a larger and larger disparity between those two groups. And unfortunately, the people who kind of want, are letting life happen to them, so to speak, the people who think, well, the process is update my resume and go to LinkedIn and apply, and that's the process, so that should get me a job. Unfortunately, I think those people are going to struggle even more than they're struggling today. Whereas the people who understand that, things are not going to happen for me, like I need to make them happen if I want them, those people are just going to have much better success and be the ones in the jobs that most people are looking for. And I don't think that's a new thing. That's kind of always been the case. Like, that portfolio strategy is something that we've talked about for a long time. And people always come back to us and say, not everybody, but people more in that first cohort come back to us and say, what if the company steals my ideas? What if they don't hire me? What if they, like, all these negative outcomes happen? And, everything in life is a calculated risk. If you don't do that, the risk is you don't get the job. But if you do it and they steal your ideas, like, at least you did what you could. And these are things that we see work. We just had a client land a fully remote role at a Fortune 500 company and get an amazing base salary. And one of the reasons they were able to do it is because at every stage of the interview process, they created one of these value validation projects and they presented it. Whereas we've had other clients who have said that same thing to us around, well, what if they steal my ideas? I don't want to spend that extra time. I'm already exhausted, and they're not getting those offers. And so I think we're just going to see, that those mindsets amplified for better or for worse. And so, it's never too early to come to that realization and shift your mindset so that you're better prepared for the future.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for all this mind-blowing information and advice for a lot of job seekers. I know it's going to be so useful because I kind of wish I learned all of this when I was doing the job seeking. I really relate to what your last note about doing all the exercises. And then, like, I had one position where I did pretty much all the exercises until the very last, and it was between me and another person. And at the very last minute, they were like, oh, this is so tough, but we're going to have to go with the other person. And it was like, oh, it's really sad. But so thank you so much for all of this. If people want to find out more about your work and how to get in touch, how do they do that?
Yeah, so our website is cultivatedculture.com. On there, we have a ton of content. We also have free tools that also layer in some AI to make a lot of that online application stuff easier so you can spend less time there and more time on everything that we talked about. We also have a one-on-one coaching program where we teach job seekers our system that I've been talking about. All that's on the website. And then I share content twice a day, every day on LinkedIn. So you can just search my name, Austin Belcak, and it should come right up there. But those are definitely the two best places. And Rose, Jeremy, I really appreciate you all having me. This was a ton of fun. The questions were awesome. You guys were great. So yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on, Austin. I think in a sea of generic advice like have a firm handshake or, use action verbs in your resume, you're giving out real gems out there, which is what we need in this tough environment. Thank you so much, Austin.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
I love that, Rose. I feel like I left feeling super energized, even in the face of this terrible market, just because Austin was sort of painting a little picture of some rays of hope poking through those dark clouds. What are some of your takeaways, Rose?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of stuff that he said. I mean, I remember the first month when I was actively searching for jobs, I was applying to a lot of positions. And that was because 5 years ago, I never had to apply for more than 20 jobs before I got at least one offer. That number became like 200, right? And I agree with him that networking is the way to go. It's actually the most painful way too, because there's actually a lot of effort that goes into it, but it is worth it in the end. I think you have said it in one of your podcasts where when you get a referral, I think you have a 1 in 16 chance of getting the actual job. So it's not crazy high, but it's a lot better than 1 out of 3,000.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, here's the thing is I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for those job seekers out there because it is a rough market. And even people who are doing all the right things, like it is still going to be tough because it's after the first 100, 200th application, it's just demoralizing. And then having to do all those exercises, I agree with him, which is you should still do them because like you can't not do them. But at the same time, like having to do them over and over and over again for multiple companies and not getting a job, it is just very hard. Yeah, what were your takeaways?
Yeah, no, I think you're so right, Rose. Like, I think a lot of times career folks like you and myself and Austin, we love to focus on the tactics and the strategy. But probably the biggest hard part about job searching is how devastating it is to your ego. If you've just spent 20 hours working on a project and then you get rejected, that is awful. But I do think that the big upside here is that probably what's even worse than the mental health aspect is the sense of disempowerment. The feeling like you're trapped in your last job or you're trapped as an unemployed person or whatever it is. And at least what Austin is saying is give yourself your own luck, give yourself your own turbo boost, because there are things that, while not guaranteed, can give you big advantages compared to the competition. So I think that's my hopeful takeaway in spite of all these challenges.
To add to that, I also think another way to frame, kind of prepare yourself when you're job searching, and what I've been telling people is you kind of have to remove your ego from the job. And I think a lot of people find so much pleasure in in getting a great position and saying like, this is who I am. I'm a smart person that works at Google because like this is the brand name. I'm good enough. And I think that people need to kind of dissociate those two ideas because that makes it a lot easier to go through the process. I'm very curious to see where the world is headed because I think in the future, networking is going to be a lot more normalized, especially because it can't not be with like all the, the saturation of applications in the market right now. And that will make it a little bit difficult for people to say yes to everyone. Because I've talked to a lot of people who say, I get a lot of messages and I don't respond to them. And I don't respond to them because there are too many. So I think there's a lot of anxiety about what will the world look like in 10 years in hiring. Because if it's gotten this tough in the last 5 years, what will it look like in 10 years?
Well, I think we've now come full circle in our first season, Rose, because we started with an emphasis on quiet quitting. And now we're back to this question of, hey, can we detach our identities from our corporate employers and really live the life that we want? And I think that's an interesting thing for us to tackle in season 2. But for now, dear listeners, please do us a huge favor. Share your own insights in the comments, your takeaway on this first season. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, and then go out there and have a great week, y'all. Thank you so much.